Have you ever wondered if there's some kind of secret to being able to more easily swim further?
Yeah, well, don't worry, you're certainly not alone. Unlike many sports, you can't simply muscle your way through swimming or wing it. Swimming is an incredibly technical sport, but there are some quick fixes that we can make to our stroke to allow us to swim further without getting as tired. The first thing you need to understand when moving through the water is that your body position in the water has a huge influence on how easily you pass through it. It's simple, really. If your feet or your hips are dropped, you're going to be pushing a larger surface area through the water and therefore creating more drag, which is going to make swimming harder. Also, the deeper you sit in the water, regardless of whether you're perfectly horizontal and in line, you're going to be creating more drag, and that is going to make swimming harder. I guess best analogy is something like a speedboat skimming along the surface of the water versus a container ship submerged deep into the water. If you can fix both of these, of course, it's going to make swimming a lot easier. But of course, these aren't just simple, quick fixes. You can't just suddenly start swimming higher in the water or start lifting your legs up. These will be happening as a result of technical issues or inefficiencies in your stroke. So let's take a look at what might be causing it.
The most common issue is our head position. It's natural to want to look ahead of yourself while swimming, but lifting your head up to look ahead will actually affect your whole body position. Think of it like a seesaw. You lift your head up, your legs are going to go down. Conversely, if you drop your head down, your legs will come up and you'll be in a better body position. Now, it may feel a little odd when you go from looking ahead of you while you're swimming to suddenly looking down at the ground and not being able to see where you're going. But if you watch the top swimmers, that is exactly what they do. Now, it's not so extreme that you're looking down at your toes when you dive into the water, but you should be looking down. Think of it rather as looking at the floor at the pool in front of you, maybe 2 to 3 meters ahead of your body.
Whilst we're talking about your head, let's discuss breathing. This is quite possibly the most popular question we receive when it comes to difficulties with swimming. How on earth do you breathe while swimming? Well, it's a very valid question. Don't be ashamed if you find yourself out of breath after literally 25 or 50 meters. There's actually very few sports out there that require you to hold your breath over and over again. Now, the common mistake is that people will take a big breath in and then desperately hold on to that breath until the next one. Now, the issue of this is that when we take that big breath of air in, we use the oxygen and we create carbon dioxide or CO2 as a waste product. Now, if you hold on to that CO2, our body detects that, and as it builds up, it basically desperately asks you to breathe. Now, also by holding on to that lung full of air, it creates a lot of tension in our upper body, which is going to restrict with our swimming, but also because of that, it creates added buoyancy in our chest, which could result in your chest being more buoyant than your hips and your legs, and therefore your hips and your legs dropping and creating drag, as we discussed before. So the answer to this is, rather than taking a huge lung full of air, try taking a normal breath, as you would when cycling or running, for example. And then crucially, as soon as your face goes back down into the water, start exhaling gently and continuously, ideally through your nose, before then turning to take another breath. Now, obviously, the perfect timing would be to have fully exhaled by the time you turn to take your next breath. Obviously, this takes time and practice. Personally, I gently exhale throughout the whole movement and then a little burst at the end to get rid of anything else before taking the next breath.
We're not finished there with breathing though. Also, how you move your head to breathe can have a huge effect on your ease of swimming. Again, instinct tells you to get your face as far away from the water as possible to get a nice clean breath of air in. But the reality is, this is going to make swimming so much harder. As we discussed earlier, any large head movements are going to have a big knock-on effect within our whole stroke. Also, rotating too much to breathe is going to affect the symmetry of your entire stroke. Instead, it should just be a small movement of the head. Keep it in that neutral position and rotate it around with your shoulders and body. And imagine trying to keep one eye in the water and the other out. In reality, the top of your head actually helps to create a bit of a cavity around your face and mouth, so it's possible to get a clean breath of air without your mouth actually being above the water surface.
Then there's the arms. Most of our propulsion through the water comes from our arms, so any incorrect movements will result in dead spots, drag, and a lack of propulsion. Now, there are a few key movements in the freestyle stroke. We've got the recovery, the catch, the pull, the push, and all of them are very important parts of the stroke, but it's the bits below the water that often end up causing the biggest issues. Now, if any of these aren't performed correctly, or at all for that matter, you're going to end up with what we call dead spots in the stroke. So rather than carrying your momentum forwards as you swim, it's going to become very stop-start. I mean, you could liken this to driving along in the car and continually putting the brake on, then accelerating back up to speed. You're going to burn through more fuel, more energy. In swimming terms, it's going to make it a lot harder. Now, the catch tends to be the one that most struggle with. As the hand enters the water, we push down on the water ever so slightly, work on getting the elbow high and above the hand. This helps to maintain our lift in the water. Remember the speed boat analogy earlier? The hand then starts to track down the center line of the body and into the pull phase. Now, try holding an elbow angle of around 90 to 120 degrees, keeping the fingers together and the palm of the hand facing behind you. Continue tracking down the center line until your hand nears your hips, and then finish the stroke with a nice push out beside your hips before starting the recovery.
Aside from looking at the technical aspects of your stroke, it's also worth looking at what you do in each session. Just hopping in and swimming up and down and hoping it'll become easier is really not going to cut it with swimming, I'm afraid. Yes, you may see some initial progress with this approach, but pretty soon you're going to plateau and see no more gains. Far better to break your session down into sets and reps, manageable chunks with recovery in between. This way, in one session, you'll be able to swim further in total, and over time, you'll build up your stamina and your endurance and be able to swim further in one go.
And then there's nutrition, fueling and hydration. Of course, we all know the importance of this, but oddly, we often forget when it comes to swimming, and we can be excused for this because we're surrounded by water, so we don't obviously notice how much we're sweating. The simple answer to this, though, is just take a bottle of water along and continually sip it throughout the swim just to be safe. When it comes to eating, obviously, this is a little more tricky, but having a little snack just before the swim will make a world of difference. I'd probably advise, though, avoiding a Sunday roast just before you jump in the water. Well, thanks ever so much for tuning in on today's video. If you enjoyed it, please do give it a thumbs up. If you've got any more questions, drop them in the comments section down below. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the channel if you want to catch more swimming content, tips, technique, sessions, and any training advice.